Nowhere is that more critical than accelerating the climate crisis, than the accelerating climate crisis. Nowhere is that more critical than accelerating the climate crisis.
This is the Rebel Call channel. Welcome to today's show. Well, out of their own mouths, right? These people are admitting that they have to accelerate the climate crisis. And if you don't understand how this works, accelerating the climate crisis really means that they're rushing to get Agenda 2030 complete. And if you're not familiar with Agenda 2030, even though you could look it up and you could see that this is what all your world leaders continually are talking about, that is your end-all, be-all enslavement in this current realm that we're in. That's it for humanity around the earth, okay? And out of their own mouths, they tell you that they're trying to accelerate it, even though, oops, I mean, he corrected himself because I'm sure somebody was in his earpiece telling him to. But if you haven't heard, Biden is calling on, and potentially could be calling on, emergency declarations about the climate, which means he's considering, and the White House is considering, climate emergency declarations, which would mean lockdowns, which would mean laws and rules in place. And they are pandering to a very dumbed down audience out there. And if you're a teenager or you're a young child, I doubt you're listening to this channel, but hopefully you are, understand that you need to remove your pride and you need to remove the mind control you've been programmed with, because that's what we're all talking about. That's what I'm talking about. We've been programmed. We pulled out of the programming. The only reason you believe in the climate agenda is because it's getting told to you day in and day out. Repetition is the key to mind control. These people are working the youth so much so that this climate agenda eventually becomes the new norm. And these kids, these teenagers don't even realize that it's enslavement. And I'm going to show you in this video how it's enslavement. But let's start with the climate emergency declaration. So Biden and the White House, they're declaring or considering declaring a national emergency to block American energy development while appeasing, of course, the extremist environmentalist donor base, which is, very few people. But if we all become aware, if you become smarter and understand what the carbon footprint is, because I know what happens is, and I get it, people hear this stuff about climate change and carbon footprint and carbon emissions. It goes in one ear, out the other ear. It's boring. It's not entertaining to them. They just go, I don't know what that is. And then they think to themselves, they're not smart enough to understand it, but I'll make you smart enough to understand it, because all it is enslavement. And I'll show you how in this video. But let's start with this, what they just aired on CBS talking about this. And of course, a lot of the alt-right media is talking about it in regards to, they could, they'll have powers, excuse me, I almost said the word. They'll have the powers, again, emergency powers like they had a few years ago during that outbreak that occurred, that planned outbreak. They'll have emergency powers. They'll be able to declare shutdowns, lockdown. Well, they're not going to need emergency powers to do that, because eventually that's going to be the new norm. That's what your carbon footprint is. They were just trying to condition you with it. And what's important for you to know, if you're somebody out there, you're like, I don't understand this stuff with carbon dioxide. Okay. Carbon dioxide is needed. It's absorbed by trees, right? Do you know how photosynthesis works? Is that one of the sciences that they don't discuss anymore? Does Bill Nye not push that anymore? Just basic common, how we breathe, right? We breathe in oxygen, then we breathe out carbon dioxide. Okay, the trees absorb it. It's a full circle. It's like a cycle, right? Then the trees, they make oxygen so we can all live. It works pretty easily, right? So really, if this was a real thing, okay, if this carbon footprint and carbon emissions and climate change was real, the easiest way to solve it would be to plant more trees. Okay, but it's not real, and they don't want to solve it. They're creating all of these weather catastrophes with weather manipulation. And when they talk about the carbon they want to reduce and the emissions they want to reduce, it's you, right? You breathe out carbon dioxide. They don't want you to breathe out anymore because they don't want you to breathe at all. And this is total slavery. So let's start with this clip that aired on CBS News about the climate agenda here. And we have a professor for Columbia, another, probably an Eastern Star witch, different secret societies, no doubt about it. But they put PhD next to them, and you're supposed to just listen to them, believe them, that they know more than you because you don't know what they're talking about. But I know what they're talking about. They're talking about enslaving you, okay? Listen to this.
White House is considering declaring a national climate emergency to unlock federal powers and stifle oil development. That's according to Bloomberg. Meanwhile, the administration is announcing several projects this Earth Week. The plans include solar energy conservation, clean water, green transportation, and cutting pollution. For some analysis, we want to bring on Melissa Lott. She's a professor at Columbia University's Climate School. She also hosts the Big Switch podcast, which explains how to rebuild our energy systems. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Tell me what a climate emergency is and what that might entail.
So when we talk about the potential for the president to declare a climate emergency, what it's saying is, you know what, there's a national emergency going on, and I need extra powers to be able to respond to it to protect the U.S. This is a contentious decision. If it's made, this discussion has come up many times, but if it is made, then the president would have additional powers in the short term, almost immediately.
And what might those powers look like, and who would be the first to be nervous about new powers the president might have? In other words, I mean, would it be fossil fuel companies? How might that work out?
Yeah, so if the president does this, he would have access to a lot of different powers. I know what's being talked about is the ability to control how we're able to sell fossil fuels. Are we able to export it? Are we able to send it to different parts of the world? Now, obviously, the countries, the organizations that depend on those exports, they would be concerned about it, as would companies. But that's not all that the president can do. The president can do a lot to bolster up the manufacturing, the production of clean energy technologies. And combined with some other powers that he has, or that he could take advantage of, he could move the needle when it comes to climate change and emissions. So it's a mixed bag. I will say, when you talk to companies, uncertainty is the worst. If I can plan around it, I'm happy, even if it's maybe not the outcome I wanted. So the uncertainty of, is this going to happen? When might it happen? And how might it be implemented is a stress point.
Let me ask you about the Climate Corps. How do you understand the Climate Corps and what it's supposed to do? It obviously echoes of FDR.
Yeah.
What are we getting from the Climate Corps, which the president discussed yesterday?
Yeah, so the Climate Corps is trying to address, or at least as an outsider, as a professor at a university when I'm studying it, it's trying to address a couple different things. One, we do not have the workforce that we need if we want to reduce emissions, if we want to clean up pollution. We don't have people trained in the different skill sets that we need, and we need them very quickly if we're going to respond to climate change, which is already happening and already affecting our health. So as a result of that, how do we train up those people at the same time, show folks that there are opportunities for all different skill sets, all different backgrounds to contribute positively in their communities, in their states?
Right. Last question. We are in a presidential year. Let's amend, and I'm not going to ask you about the political thing, except try and do it this way. There are going to be voters who care about the climate.
Yes.
How do those voters evaluate a sitting president and what he has done and what he should have done in the context of a world in which there's a lot of partisanship and where you can't just wave a wand as a president? How should those voters think about how they're going to evaluate, if they care about climate, how they should evaluate the incumbent president?
Yeah, so when you look at the president, a president has a certain number of powers. I mean, we can go back to Schoolhouse Rock days, and who's got the division of powers and where. The president has certain ones that he can implement, that he can take advantage of, soft powers and hard powers. So which ones has he done successfully? So you can look at the Inflation Reduction Act. You can look at other policies that have become law and his role there, but also in terms of executive orders, what initiative he's taken. One example of those is Justice 40. So how are we making sure benefits go to communities that have been disadvantaged and been underinvested in the past? How has the president actually addressed that? So it's a combination of things, realizing the president in this country does not have all the powers, only has some of them.
Melissa Lott from Columbia University's Climate School. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so when you hear that clip, people out there will just go, wow, oh, okay, maybe, we do need to get rid of this stuff and go on green energy. They don't even realize that on green energy, we're automatically going to begin the enslavement process, okay? You're not going to be able to run your heat or your air condition as much, and you might be like, oh, well, that's spoiled anyway. I want to get rid of that. Yeah, until you're sitting there on a 100-degree day, and the government's controlling your smart thermostat, and you can only put it at 85, okay? And you're like, well, at least we're alive, right? And instead of going, why did we give them the power or the rights to do this? Or most of the people will be so brainwashed, they'll be like, this is fine. It's for the benefit of humanity. I'm a good person, right? No, you're not. You're an idiot, okay? If you believe this, you're dumb, but don't worry about it. You could smarten up and realize what it really is, right? So when they talk about going green, they're talking about limiting the amount of power and electricity you have. On top of that, they want to go green and limit those things, and then they want you an electric vehicle, of course, so you can only drive X amount of distance, which will be small, and then you'll be in a smart city where you'll be contained. So they'll tell you don't have to worry about driving anywhere. And when grandma's dying a few states over and you want to go visit her, well, guess what? You're crap out of luck. So let's take a look at a few of these things here, okay? For those of you that are trying to understand what they're talking about with a climate emergency, okay? Is enacting more rules and laws 10 times worse than the ones we just saw during the outbreak, and these would be permanent. These would be permanent. It's about changing your life, and that means ruining it. So let's start with MasterCard. I covered this, right? MasterCard unveiled the new carbon calculator tool for banks, okay? Then what did we have? We had banks that were coming out, and they were conducting climate analysis because they were enacting carbon footprints without you even realizing it. Wells Fargo, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs. Okay, they all started using the carbon footprint because they were tracking and monitoring your spending habits. And you might go, what does that mean? I don't buy anything the government should care about. Oh yeah? You're only going to be, this is how they enslave you. You're only going to be allowed to buy X amount of food. So it's like rationing you without telling you they're rationing you. You're only going to be able to buy X amount of food. You're only going to be able to leave your house for X amount of hours. You're only going to be able to drive X amount of distance, period. And you ain't going to be able to travel. I'll tell you that much. Maybe once a year, right? Because look at this. It's time to limit how often we travel abroad. Carbon passports may be the answer. Now, I'll show you a clip here that's come out from the banks and how they're talking about and what they want to do so you have a better understanding. But also look at this clip from the World Economic Forum and how they're openly talking about how cool and neat this is to monitor and track you. Yeah, surveillance state. How cool and neat. Listen to this psychopath.
We're developing, through technology, an ability for consumers to measure their own carbon footprint. What does that mean? That's where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So, individual carbon footprint tracker. Stay tuned. We don't have it operational yet, but this is something that we're working on.
Under the scheme, everyone in the UK would be allocated an annual carbon allowance.
Stored electronically, rather like a supermarket loyalty card, points would be deducted every time we buy or use non-renewable energy. For example, using electricity to power appliances in the home.
To meet this reduction target, we would need to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide we release into the atmosphere by about 40% by 2030. Such a fast change would require radical solutions. Not that kind of solution. Today, 40% of carbon emissions are produced from the use of energy in the home and personal transportation, so reducing emissions by households is immensely important. How could this be achieved? One innovative solution is personal carbon trading, or PCT. Under a PCT policy, governments would set a personal and equal cap on emissions that would reduce gradually over time. Each individual would then receive the same yearly carbon allowance. People with low carbon lifestyles would use up their accounts slowly, whereas people with high energy and carbon lifestyles would find their carbon account empties more quickly. Energy consumption would become more expensive once their allowance runs out. People who don't use up their allowance would be able to sell the remainder in the personal carbon market. This could benefit less well-off or greener people who generally consume less energy, and encourage people with more options to reduce their carbon footprint. For example, they could insulate their homes better or switch to more energy-efficient appliances and transportation. Dr. Yael Parag from IDC Herzliya and Dr. Tina Fawcett from Oxford University have been researching PCT. What would PCT look like in reality? How could PCT be both fair and effective? Would the public and politicians accept PCT? Parag and Fawcett argue that PCT would be effective as it taps into three powerful behavioral drivers. Economic. A carbon-intensive lifestyle would be more expensive. Psychological. Raising carbon awareness would motivate people to change their energy use habits and to prefer a lower carbon lifestyle. Social. The fact that everyone would have an equal allowance would set a new social norm around a shared effort to reduce carbon emissions and help limit climate change. Researchers in several countries are already looking into this radical idea. Dr. Parag and Dr. Fawcett are continuing to develop it. They're defining a research agenda and exploring how PCT, together with other policies, could help us become a low-carbon society.
Okay, and another thing that's important to keep in mind as we talk about all these things that come, let's go back to the beginning, right? Biden considering climate emergency, because people just go, I don't know what that means, right? Because conservatives look at it and they go, oh man, he's going to take away our fake election this year. And they're going to do whatever they can to keep Trump out, so they probably will. They're so far gone, they don't even realize the enemy's agendas because they're just so into this whole movement, this MAGA movement and everything else. They believe, they tell you, like I keep saying, they keep saying it's fake news out there. All this stuff that, the CNN, et cetera, talks about, but they believe some of the other stuff. Yeah, when they're talking about this, they're going, that's fake news, but they don't even realize what it is. And they don't care about you voting because your vote doesn't count. Okay, these laws are to enslave you. So we have Biden who's ready to declare that. Then we've had all these stories about the bank using a carbon footprint, implementing carbon passports, as you heard there. And then we get to the carbon tax. Okay, this has been talked about since the like 60s, 70s, 80s. And people laughed it off back then. This is an article, look. This is June 30th, 1989. UN predicts disaster if global warming is not checked. UN environmental official says entire nations could be wiped off the face of the earth by rising sea levels if the global warming trend is not reversed by the year 2000. So you might say, well, I don't get it. Why were they saying that then? They're saying it then because this agenda has been in place for a long time. They haven't been able to convince people. So at that time period, nobody bought the propaganda. There was no phones. There was no internet. It was just newspapers. And people literally would take the newspaper and use it as toilet paper after they read articles like this because it was a much smarter time period. People were critically thinking then because they weren't always sitting in front of a TV or a device. So they weren't easily controllable. So it didn't happen in 2000. It didn't happen in 2000 not because, luckily people's carbon emissions went down. It didn't happen then because nobody believed it. Now, fast forward to where we are now. All the technology, you're constantly under attack from technology. And by attack, I mean you're getting brainwashed constantly, right? At that time period in the 90s, celebrities were celebrities, but nobody gave a crap where these people were going and peeing. Yes, people would probably ask them for autographs on the streets, but nobody cared where they lived and what they did with their social life. No one's running up to them in restaurants trying to take selfies with them. That life didn't exist then, okay? Now we're at a point where celebrities could tell you that, that a 5-year-old boy thinks it's a girl and you should change the gender or you're a bad person. Celebrities have so much control over the minds that they're able to convince you of things like, say, the carbon footprint and carbon emissions. Thus, they're going forward with an agenda they've tried to move forward for a long time. Now, the carbon tax ultimately is the carbon footprint in a sense. You have a carbon footprint. You're allowed to do X amount. You go over that amount, you'll be taxed. This is what people, and this is why it's, look, this is why I'm one of the rare ones out there and one of the ones that's constantly the most silenced. Okay, it's because I get what's going on and I'm trying to warn people about it. Elon Musk is a plant. They need these plants out there for the conservatives and the Democrats. They need you to put your emotions into these people, think that they have your best interest in mind. It will prevent a revolution, and that's exactly what it's doing. Elon Musk is pushing a brain chip, yet all these conservatives are okay with him because he's saying, I'm all for free speech. They all love him now, even though he was a liberal his whole life like Trump, right? This is tweeted out from Musk. He says the only action needed to solve the climate change is a carbon tax, okay? Goes on to say it multiple times. Keep tax revenue constant, but shift to a tax and tax what is probably bad, CO2, just like alcohol and cigarettes are taxed. And people go, what does that mean? I'm going to pay more money? Your tax isn't going to be, yes, it's going to be deducted out of your equality, equal, DEI, all this other, whatever you want to call your equal income. But really what it's going to be is if you're going to enter your home and leave your home and everything is going to be digital, you're going to be a prisoner. The tax is going to prevent you from going places, from buying things. That's what it's there for. Everyone hears tax and it's like, the government just wants to take more pennies out of my bank account. Well, when the carbon tax is in place, as it is in Canada, which people are losing their minds over, it's going to be everywhere. Okay? It's going to be everywhere unless the citizens revolt now. They're not going to care about how much money you give them. It's about how much control they could have over you. They actually, believe it or not, they care more about controlling you than they do about money. They print money. They want to be able to control your happiness, how often you move. They want you to live like prisoners. They want us to be prisoners. People don't get that. And people go, well, why don't they just arrest us then? Oh, yeah? Do you see a prison on every corner that you're around? How often do you see a giant prison? Not very often. You know, there's only like, what, 1.2 million prisoners? There's a lot of people. There's billions of people in the earth. And this isn't just America they want to do this to. It's everybody, right? Well, prisoners get a little recess. They get a little time to make phone calls, do these things. That's exactly what this is going to be. Now, here is the video on the carbon tax if you don't understand how the carbon tax works.
So the only thing we gain by slowing down the transition is just slowing it down. It doesn't make it not occur, it just slows it down. The worst case, however, is more displacement and destruction than all the wars in history combined. Okay, these are the best worst case scenarios. So then we have about 3% of scientists that believe in the best case, about 97% that believe in the worst case. This is why I call it the dumbest experiment in history ever. But why would you do this? The transition is delayed, or is happening slowly, is because there is a hidden subsidy on all carbon-producing activity. In a healthy market, if you have, say, 10 euros of benefit and 4 euros of harm to society, the profit would be 6 euros. It sort of makes obvious sense. This is where the incentives are aligned with a good future. This is not the case today. But if you have the incentives aligned, then the forcing function towards a good future, towards a sustainable energy future, will be powerful. In an unhealthy market, you have your 10 euros of benefit, you have your 4 euros, but the 4 euros isn't taxed. So you have an untaxed negative externality. This is basically economics 101. So you have basically unreasonable profit and a forcing function to do carbon-emitting activity because this cost to society is not being paid. The net result is 35 gigatons of carbon per year into the atmosphere. So this is analogous to not paying for garbage collection. And it's not as though we should say, in the case of garbage, have a garbage-free society. It's very difficult to have a garbage-free society. But it's just important that people pay for the garbage collection. So we need to go from having an untaxed negative externality, which is effectively a subsidy of enormous size, $5.3 trillion a year, according to the IMF, every year. We need to move away from this and have a carbon tax. The solution, obviously, is to remove the subsidy. So that means we need to have a carbon tax, and to make it something which is neither a left nor a right issue, we should make it probably a revenue-neutral carbon tax. So this would be a case of increasing taxes on carbon, then reducing taxes in other places. So maybe there would be a reduction in sales tax or VAT and an increase in carbon tax, so that only those using high levels of carbon would pay an increased tax. In order to give industry time to react, this could be a phased-in approach, so that maybe it takes 5 years before the carbon taxes are very high. So that means that only companies that don't take action today will suffer in 5 years. But there needs to be a clear message from government in this regard, because the fundamental problem is the rules today incent people to create carbon. And this is madness. And whatever you incent will happen. That's why we're seeing very little effect thus far. And depending on what action we take, will drive the carbon number to either extreme or moderate levels. I think it's pretty much a given that the 2-degree C increase will occur. The question is whether it's going to be much more than that, not if there will be a 2-degree increase. So then the question is, so what can you do? I would say whenever you have the opportunity, talk to the politicians, ask them to enact a carbon tax. We have to fix the unpriced externality. I would talk to your friends about it and fight the propaganda from the carbon industry.
Economic wisdom says if you want less of something, tax it. And one thing we all want less of are toxic emissions that harm our environment. Our current environmental solutions include regulations that stifle the economy and subsidies that disproportionately benefit high earners and specific industries. Both are costly and have a limited impact on the environment. But there is another approach that's often overlooked, a carbon tax. Using fossil fuels creates harmful greenhouse gas emissions like carbon dioxide. A carbon tax places a cost on those emissions, which makes any products and services derived from fossil fuels more expensive for businesses to produce and consumers to purchase. These higher prices lead to less consumption and encourage the creation and adoption of cleaner energy sources. This is a win for the environment, and it can also generate significant revenue. But a carbon tax like any other tax, isn't a perfect solution. If designed poorly, the tax could increase costs, especially for low-income families, and ultimately slow the economy. But if designed carefully, a carbon tax could actually be far more sustainable and efficient at improving our environment as well as the economy. Here are 3 principles for sound carbon tax design. First, a carbon tax should cover the broadest possible range of polluting activities. This means taxing all carbon emissions at their source, not just targeting a single industry or activity. Next, the tax should be a substitute for existing regulations like automotive and appliance standards, which provide minor environmental benefit at high cost. A sufficient carbon tax could achieve similar or better environmental results at a much lower cost. Finally, since the tax itself benefits the environment, the revenue it generates can be recycled to fund other priorities, like reducing high individual or corporate income taxes, improving tax treatment for business investment, or tackling the growing federal deficit. Every policy has trade-offs, but a well-designed carbon tax has the potential to protect the environment without harming consumers, jobs, or businesses.
And that's what everybody's hero, and that was, his voice narrating it. That's exactly what Elon Musk wants. And that's what the billionaires want, a carbon tax, and it's already in Canada. So let's recap, right? They're telling us all about our carbon footprint. That's what that commercial from MasterCard was, right? Your carbon footprint limit. In other words, you get a limit. You go to the grocery store, you want to buy a turkey, you've decided all of a sudden you want to make a turkey. Well, you won't be able to buy meat because remember, meat's bad, right? Because they want to control what you can eat too. But whatever it is you want to buy, you're not allowed to. There's a carbon footprint limit. And not only that, you won't be allowed to go to the store. And your card will automatically be blocked, okay? And if it's not a transaction you're trying to make, if it's you trying to go out for a bike ride when the sun goes down, or maybe it's you trying to take a shower after a long day's work. Well, guess what? You're only able to shower every 3 days or so. You can't shower. You shower twice a day right now? You're not going to shower twice a day. You flush your toilet? That's gone. Say bye-bye. All these little things that nobody thinks about are all part of the carbon footprint. They even tell us this. They tell us, oh, please make sure you don't flush your toilet all the time for the climate. People are like, okay. Oh, yeah, until you got a dino dump in there, stinking up the joint. You're like, I got to flush this. They go, no, you can't. Well, you can't flush it. Why is the flusher not working? Well, it's a smart toilet, right? Yeah, so what? Oh, well, they've turned it off because you've reached your maximum amount of flushes. You've also reached your maximum amount of showers. You've reached your maximum amount of times to go outside. That's what the carbon footprint is. Again, I go back to what I said in the beginning of the video. This is common sense. Okay, if you hear this, and people don't like to hear this stuff because, again, they hear it and then they go, oh, I don't want this guy telling me he's smarter than me. I'm not trying to say I'm smarter than anybody. I'm telling you what this is. I'm trying to prevent slavery for all of us, okay? I was under mind control too. I felt for this stuff. I went to school. I wasted years of my life learning this stuff. Then I broke free and realized I was listening to liars, total liars, lying about the history of the world and lying ultimately about all of the stuff on the news that they want me to believe is real so that I feel this way and I do ultimately what they want me to do, okay? Basic science, for anyone out there that questions the channel, you're like, I don't believe what this guy says, right? Basic science tells us we actually need carbon dioxide, right? Carbon dioxide goes right to the trees. The trees give us oxygen. It's a circle of life in a sense, right? Photosynthesis was once science. You don't hear them ever mentioning photosynthesis, do you? I remember hearing that in school. That was worthwhile learning, right? Learned that in like 4th grade, right? We all learned about that. You don't hear them talking about it anymore. Why? Because when you start talking about photosynthesis, then you start talking about planting trees, it would actually solve the problem. But don't you notice that Bill Gates and these people, I've covered this too, our government is putting vacuums to suck carbon out of the air. People are like, that's a great idea. Trees are vacuums to suck carbon out of the air. They're sucking it out of the air and they're actually bringing it underground so that they can live underground, right? And plant trees underground. That's what they're doing. They're building cities underground with trees, etc. So that while they destroy the Earth's surface, they'll be underground. So people are like, oh, wow, they're using carbon vacuums. That's great. It's going to help the climate. No one's going, wait, aren't the trees literally carbon vacuums? Don't they eat this stuff? Shouldn't we plant more trees then instead of make these vacuums with trillions of tax dollars? No. Because they want to suck it out of the air and then bring it down underneath so they can, of course, grow food and everything else underground while they destroy everything above here, and they thrive underground. And then eventually, like all the predictive programming has showed us over the years, they'll eventually come out from underground, right? Just kind of like the show that just came out that I covered, Fallout. How many movies, shows have we seen over the years, the post-apocalyptic setting where people come out from underground? And they're like, oh man, we see on American Horror Story, right? The witches coming out from underground. Everything looks like it does right now in Greece. Or it did in New York last year, right? Orange skies, nothing's growing, everything's dead. While your government's blocking out the sun and and sun shielding, while also cloud seeding, they like to call, which is really just geoengineering. Okay? This is a government conspiracy. And it's not a conspiracy theory. It is a conspiracy. Fact. People automatically dismiss when they hear conspiracy theory or the word conspiracy because they've been trained to. But really, the term conspiracy is a secret plan by a group to do something unlawful or harmful, the action of plotting or conspiring, right? This is the perfect example of a conspiracy. You have rich people telling you they want to block the sun, telling you they want to suck carbon out of the air and put it underground with a vacuum when they could just plant trees. And then we constantly see them patent things like Tesla's earthquake machine or HARP or all these other things that they have. And then we look at things like Operation Popeye and we say, wait a minute, they can create rain, and why do we have droughts then? And then you go, what? Maybe there is a conspiracy going on. No, there is one. It's just a matter of what you believe and what you don't believe. And it really comes down to people out there realizing that these people are your wicked ex-psychopathic husband or wife. That's what they are. They're somebody that you thought you could trust. You probably, you ended up marrying them or dating them for a long time. Then you realize they were a bad person, right? Everyone's been there before. And maybe they weren't really a bad person, but you weren't just a match, but you felt that way, right? You were betrayed. That's what the government's doing. But now we're at a time where people, they're fearful of confrontation. They're fearful of this type of news because they don't want to believe it to be true, but it's true. And if you don't believe that it's true, it's going to be too late, way, way, way too soon. So that's what's going on. The carbon climate emergency declaration that could potentially be passed. All these things tie into it, all the things I covered. Right? Your credit card and your banks using carbon calculators. Then developing a carbon passport, right? That tracks where you go. And of course, this does tie into the digital ID. I told you about the UN predicting of this in the year 2000, it was supposed to go down. It's 2024, right? And then your heroes like Elon Musk telling us we need a carbon tax. Huh? A carbon tax for what? Oh, a carbon tax that punishes us if we actually go in our backyard. And they go, that's nuts. This is what they'll tell you. They'll be like, that guy's crazy. We're not telling you if you go in your backyard, you're punished. Yeah, not yet. But you're already telling us that we can't eat meat, which is really beneficial to people's health, right? You're already telling us we can't drive gas-powered cars, right? So eventually, yes, because since human beings breathe out carbon dioxide, right? That eventually is the carbon issue because they'll just come out and they'll tell you all these things that people have done, limiting their, getting rid of their cars and getting electric cars, limiting their travel. Oh, but it's not enough. And they'll go, what? They'll go, it's not enough. Now you can't go outside anymore. Just 20 minutes a day. That's it. And people will go, okay. And then they'll remember when I said this stuff, and they'll probably still be under such mind control. They'll go, that's not what's happening. They just really care. Do they? Do you have zero discernment? If you're out there and you think that these people, Republican or Democrat, care, it doesn't matter which one. This is an attack just on Democrats. It's both of them. Trump, Biden, all of them. Obama, Barry Soetoro, all of them. Bush. They're all in on it together. Do they look like good people to you? Do they look like people you could trust? I'm not saying trust me, follow me. I'm trying to lead a revolution. I'm telling you to think freely and understand what they're doing. Don't fall for their propaganda because that's all this is. It's a system of slavery, a system of control, all under the guise of climate change. I thank everybody for being here. Hope you're all doing well. God bless you as always and your families.